So do you ever just get sucked into like a rabbit trail of like looking something up and you end in a really just a stupid place? Like this happens to me more often than maybe it should. So somehow this week I got sucked into looking up like what the world record for holding your breath is. I don't know why. That's where I landed. And I thought, because I was kind of looking into some stuff I thought 8 minutes. Sounds like a lot, right? 8 minutes? Like, because I'm like basing off myself, I'm like, I don't even think I can do a minute. So if somebody, 8 sounds crazy to me. So I'm always blown away by world records. 8 sounded insane. But when I looked it up and actually found the world record, I actually didn't believe it at first because I didn't think it was physically possible. But the world record is not 8 minutes. The world record for holding your breath is 24 minutes and 37 seconds. What? That's longer than an episode of The Office. Like, isn't that crazy? Like, you could watch an entire episode and this guy's still underwater. Fine. His name's Budimir. He's a 56-year-old Croatian man, but absolutely held his breath for 24 minutes and 37 seconds. I thought that was impossible. And the reason I thought that was impossible is because oxygen is your most urgent need, right, physically. You have other needs, right? You can go 3 days without water. You can go a couple of weeks without food, but oxygen, unless your name's Budimir, you can only go a couple of minutes and you will not survive. No oxygen will kill you pretty quick. So the way it works, oxygen is an essential molecule in your cells. Your mitochondria, you know what that is, right? Powerhouse of the cells, it's the only thing you learn in biology. Your mitochondria uses oxygen to complete the chemical reaction that creates energy for your cells to work. And without oxygen, the whole process shuts down and energy can't be produced. The organ that's most affected by this is your brain. Your brain needs the most energy and stores the least, which is why if you lose oxygen, like you say you somehow don't have it, the first thing that happens is you pass out. And that's your brain's attempt to like conserve energy. So cells don't die, it just shuts down. No oxygen will kill you pretty quick. Low oxygen, L-O-W oxygen, will have some pretty severe effects on your body as well, right? You can get confused, disoriented, chest pains, headaches, prolonged low oxygen. Your heart will be damaged, your lungs will be damaged, your brain will be damaged. You can't function very well in low oxygen environments. And over time, it will cause permanent damage. So no oxygen will kill you pretty quick. Low oxygen will do progressively more damage over time and could still kill you. Now you're like, is this church or biology class? Hold on. No oxygen will kill you. Low oxygen will cause progressively more damage. Here's what I want to talk about today. The oxygen of human relationships is trust. The oxygen of human relationships is trust. No trust will kill a relationship really fast. If you get to zero trust, the clock is ticking. That relationship cannot survive zero trust. Low trust is not ideal. It's not ideal, and it will cause, if you have a relationship that has low trust, it will cause progressively more and more damage and can still kill the relationship. Now listen, I think your body needs more than oxygen, right? You need more than oxygen, but oxygen is the most urgent need that your body has. And I think your relationships need more than trust, certainly need more than trust. But trust is the most urgent need. Without trust, everything else just doesn't work very well. So what we're doing today, we're jumping back into the story of Joshua. We've been in Joshua since the beginning of the year. And in this part of the story that we're going to look at today, Joshua gets lied to. He gets burned, deceived, duped, bamboozled, hoodwinked. His trust is broken in this story, and we're going to see how this went. So in order to understand how, though, you need a little bit of the backstory. So the people of Israel are trying to take the promised land that God gave them, but there's enemies in there, so they're doing some work to clear out the promised land. And when they came into this land that God promised them, God gave them some commands. And one of the commands was, don't make any treaties with the people who live inside the promised land. You can make treaties with people who live outside the promised land, but not the people who live inside the promised land. Their job was to clear them out. And God had reasons. We don't have time to go into all that. God had some really good reasons for why all that was. But they were supposed to listen to this, and they knew that. So that's the context for this story today. We'll pick it up in Joshua chapter 9, starting in verse 3. But when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to deception to save themselves. They sent ambassadors to Joshua, loading their donkeys with weathered saddlebags and old patched wineskins. So they heard about how things had gone, and they're setting up a deception here, verse 5. They put on worn out, patched sandals and ragged clothes. The bread they took with them was dry and moldy. When they arrived at the camp of Israel at Gilgal, they told Joshua and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant land to ask you to make a peace treaty with us." So this is a pretty elaborate deception here, right? This is intentional, thought out, planned out, well executed, and Joshua did not see this coming, So verse 7, the Israelites replied to these Hivites, "How do we know you don't live nearby? For if you do, we cannot make a treaty with you." They replied, "We are your servants." That's not an answer, is it, right? They just asked if you live nearby, and they said, "We're your servants." If you're ever in a place where you might not maybe trust somebody and you ask a question and they don't give a direct answer, red flag, right? But who are you? Joshua demanded. Where do you come from? So you can kind of tell here, Joshua is having this conversation and something doesn't feel right. Something feels off here. And he's got a gut feeling. You can almost sense that Joshua has a gut feeling, but he's not going to trust it. And I just want to point that out, that a lot of times when you're having those interactions and you feel like something's off, you got to listen to those gut feelings, because he should have. And again, he knows that this is a really big deal, that if they live inside the promised land, he cannot make this treaty that they're asking him to make. But they continue, verse 9. They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country. We have heard of the might of the Lord your God and all he did in Egypt. We have also heard what he did to the two Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, King Sihon and of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who live in Ashtaroth. So our elders and our people instructed us, take supplies for a long journey, go meet with the people of Israel and tell them, we are your servants, please make a treaty with us." So not only did they dress up, not only did they get some moldy bread, scuff their sandals up intentionally, but they're adding to the facade, they're adding flattery. Oh man, your God's awesome. We heard about what he did in Egypt. We heard about the stuff that God's done. And they're talking up how awesome God is. And this hits Joshua, right? Because Joshua's like, you heard about Egypt? Egypt was awesome. He's sucked into that. And they're using flattery to try and get him to believe them. And again, that's something you kind of need to watch out for. When people start to butter you up, when people start to point out how awesome you are. You know the truth, right? Don't believe your own press there. So they're working all the angles. They've got the dress up, they've got the words, they're doing all the things. Here's what happens, verse 14. So the Israelites examined their food, but they did not consult the Lord. Then Joshua made a peace treaty with them and guaranteed their safety. The leaders of the community ratified their agreement with a binding oath. So Joshua does the thing. He makes a treaty with people he was not supposed to make a treaty with. And you can see how serious this is. This isn't just he doesn't sign a thing. They took this serious. This is a binding oath. This is a big deal that they did this. And he did the thing that God told him not to. Not on purpose. It was not intentional. But he was deceived into doing something that he wasn't supposed to do. And here's the crazy thing. Even though he didn't know that he did something wrong, the consequences of this are huge, by the way. Absolutely huge. So number one, the first thing that happens is they find out pretty quick that they're not from far away. They live right down the road. It's the next place they were going to come to. So they find that out, and immediately Joshua's leadership takes a hit. So if you've ever been a leader and you have something like this happen where you're we're going to do this thing, and then bam, get hit, and all the people of Israel are dude, what are you doing, man? Why didn't you do your homework? These people live right over there. So his leadership takes a hit. The second thing that happens is they get sucked into a battle in a place and a time that they never would have chose. And if you were here last week, we saw we took the story out of order. We actually looked at the battle last week where they get sucked into protecting these people that they promised to be allies with when they would have never had to. So they're in a battle in a way, in a time that they would have never chose. And then even crazier than that, the consequences go bigger than that. 400 years later, if you look up King David's story, he ends up in a situation with the Gibeonites. So David, and again, you have to jump chapters in the Bible ahead to see David having a problem that stemmed from this deception and this decision of Joshua's to sign this treaty. Because Joshua was quick to trust people that he shouldn't have trusted at all. Now, you know a little bit of what this feels like, maybe? When trust gets broken, the consequences are devastating, right? Number one, inside of you. That's having trust broken is one of the most painful things that you can experience, is it not? And then not only that, the consequences typically don't stay with you, right? Broken trust seems to reverberate out and affect people around you as well. And the bigger the trust that you had in the person that broke it, the worse it is. The deeper and wider the devastation that comes. So we don't want to make the same mistake that Joshua did. We want to avoid this. So every once in a while, it's a couple of things. Number one, every once in a while I'll do a sermon that is specifically geared towards the ADD crowd in the room. And here's what I mean by that. This sermon has 8 points, which is like 7 too many. But I do this on purpose. So if you have ADD, this is great, because if you don't have ADD, you're like, that's a lot of points. Not for them, because they miss a lot of them. So they'll tune out, and then when they come back in, it's cool because it's a new point and they can understand it, and it's great. So this is for you. If that's you, you're welcome. Secondly, what you need to understand about this, so we're talking about trust here, and I know there's kind of 2 groups of people in the room. Some of you've been burned. You have enough life that you got burned, and you really struggle to trust. Maybe even some of you are way over on the spectrum, and you're like, I don't do that anymore. I have shut this down. I have walls up, gates up, locked, double barred. I'm not letting anybody in anymore because I've gotten hurt 1 too many times. So you're like way over here. Now there's other people in the room who you have never met a stranger in your life. Everybody you meet is awesome, and you want to trust. It's so easy to trust. You let everybody in, and it's a great butterflies and rainbows everywhere. It's an awesome life that you have for assuming the best about every single person you meet. My guess is if this is you, you're probably a little younger, because the longer you live, the harder it is to be this way without getting really, really hurt. But I know I'm speaking to 2 extremes, so this is on you a little bit. I'm going to give 8 points, and the points my attempt is to kind of pull you away from the extremes a little bit. But if I give a point that talks about being cautious on trust, and you're over here, you're going to be like, amen, that's right. Hold on. And then if I give a point about breaking down the walls a little bit, you're going to be tempted to amen, but you probably need to listen to the points that you're not excited about today. You know what I'm saying? So this is kind of you get to decide which ones God wants to speak to you today. But we're doing 8. The first 5, we're going to actually look outside of this story and kind of look at some of the stuff Jesus would say about trust. And then the last 3, we'll jump back in to the story and see what we can learn from that. So the first 5 principles here would have helped Joshua not make the mistake that he makes here. And hopefully can help us not make the same mistake that Joshua made. So here's the first one. First, trust principle. Love is unconditional. Trust is not. Love is unconditional. Trust is not. Now, this is specifically for Christians. So if you're not a Christian, you're like, love is not unconditional for me. I get it. But for Christians, we follow this guy named Jesus, right? And Jesus lived this radical life of unconditional love. He loved people everywhere he went, at whatever town he went, whatever dirt road he was on. He just loved people who definitely didn't deserve any of that. Jesus lived an unconditional love life. And if we follow him, that's something we're supposed to have, right? We're supposed to love people unconditionally. This is something that we're supposed to do. Not only are we following his example, we're following his commands, right? Jesus said to love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. It's a radical way to live. And the reason we do that, if you're a follower of Jesus, is because that's the way he loved us. Jesus loved us unconditionally. He treated us better than we deserved. And when we accept this unconditional love, and then we turn around and we extend this unconditional love, we're supposed to have that. Now, where we get it twisted is, I think we want to love like Jesus, but we end up trusting like fools. We want to love like Jesus, but we trust like fools. And love and trust are not the same thing. They're super related, but they're not the same thing. So I want to show you one thing that Jesus said that kind of helps tease this out. He says in Luke 16:10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So you can kind of see here, definitely he is pushed unconditional love throughout his entire ministry, but here he's making a distinction that trust he's gonna think a little differently about. If you can be trusted with a little, you can be trusted with a lot. He didn't say, trust them with a lot. He said, no, trust them with little and see what they do. How do they do with the little that you gave them? And if they do a good job with that, then you can start to trust them with more. But if you give them a little bit of trust and they burn it, well, they're definitely gonna burn this over here. So this is conditional, right? You give someone a little bit of trust, you see what they do with it, and if they do a good job, you can give them more. But if you give them a little bit of trust and they burn it, well, don't be stupid. Trust is not unconditional. It is foolish for you to give away trust flippantly. And I want to encourage you, if you are a follower of Jesus, to separate these two things out in your mind. Love is unconditional. Certainly love like Jesus. Radically crazy love people. But trust is not unconditional. If you're trusting every person you meet because you think that's what Jesus wants you to do, it's not. I release you from this burden. You do not have to trust every person you meet. Jesus didn't. You don't have to either. Joshua did this here and he got burned. He should not have trusted the way he did. And you don't want to be like Joshua in this case, which leads to the second principle. Here's the second trust principle. Trust is a bridge, not a door. It needs to be built, not opened. It's a bridge, not a door. It needs to be built, not open. Sometimes we think in terms of like word pictures and illustrations. And I think whether you realize there are not a lot of people in this room, you think of trust as a door, which means it's either open or not. You either trust them or you don't. It's very binary. It's either if this or this. There's not like any nuance to that. And you kind of have this mentality like I either let people in or I don't. And it's either or. But I want to encourage you that I think trust needs to be more of a gradient than it is like a choice of either trust them all the way or don't. So here's my example with Jesus. Jesus had crowds follow him, right? Hundreds and thousands of people would follow Jesus. And he had a certain way that he spoke to them, a certain level of authenticity and transparency that he had at that level. But then he also had the 12 disciples, right? The 12 guys, we know their names, like those guys were close to him. He had a deeper level of trust with them. He was more transparent, more authentic with them, revealed more to them, more candid with them. And then even deeper than that, I don't know if you know this, he had an inner circle of 3, Peter, James, and John, who he treated even different than, they got to know even more than the rest of the 12 did. So Jesus did not have this, I either trust you or I don't. Jesus had kind of a gradient of trust across his life. And I think you need to think in terms of that. Don't just trust or not trust. Where are you at with the person? I think trust can grow into a depth, but I'm guessing if you're really, really authentic, really, really transparent, is only going to be with a couple. You're probably not going to have a huge crowd of people who know you inside and out. And then you need to have some people who know you pretty well. They're not going to know your deepest, darkest stuff, but they'll know you pretty well. And then you'll have the crowds who might know the least about you. But don't think of things in terms of just either I trust them or I don't. I think there's a gradient. And then the other thing I want you to see in this is that trust being a bridge, being built. Again, you can be building trust. It's a gradient across, but it also needs built from both sides. A bridge that's built from both sides, you don't just build the whole bridge yourself. You want them to be building too. It's two people learning to trust each other. It's mutual, and it takes time. It takes time to build trust, which leads to our third principle. Third principle is that trust is built in drops, but lost in buckets. Built in drops, but lost in buckets. One of the things I tell my teenagers pretty often is that trust is one of the most valuable things that they can get. And I'm usually selfishly saying that because I want them to care about how much I trust them. But I'm trying to get them to see that, hey, trust is so valuable because of like the economy of trust is it grows in drops. But when you break trust, it's like knocking the bucket over. It is gone so fast, takes forever to earn, and a moment, one decision to destroy it. And that's why you need to value trust more than almost anything else in your life. Proverbs 22:1 says, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. I think a part of a good name is being trustworthy, being able to be trusted. And this is saying that name, that being trusted thing It's worth more than gold, more than silver, more than great riches. This is trust that you earn in your life. I want to encourage you, if someone has trusted you, to view that almost as a sacred thing. That's hallowed ground for someone to give you their trust. So important, so important. Now this is one of the places where it's hard for me to speak confidently because there's two groups in the room. Part of the reason it's so valuable is because it is almost impossible. Think in terms of the bucket. So say you spent years earning drip, drip, drip of trust, and you've got this full bucket of trust. And then you make one very dumb decision and you knock that bucket over. And then you try to set it back and you try to get the water back into the bucket. Have you ever tried to get water back into a bucket? And in this case, you don't have a mop. You've got like 2 Q-tips. Just imagine, this is the picture I want in your mind. Imagine using Q-tips, trying to get water back into the bucket. Odds are, however long that would take, there's no way when you're done is the bucket going to be as full as it was before you knocked it over. Trust is that valuable that it's going to take an absolute miracle of God for you to get the trust back that you broke. Now, that's me encouraging you if you're in a place where you have a lot of trust. I am also aware that there's people here who you are currently looking at a bucket that just got knocked over, and I don't want to discourage you. I do think God can do anything. I do believe that God can do miracles with this, that if you're in a relationship and you're setting the bucket up and you're looking at it going, man, that used to be full and now it's empty, and you're looking how daunting it's going to be. It is going to be daunting, but I believe that God can rebuild that. He can do anything. So don't get all the way discouraged. I want to speak out of both sides of my mouth. If you haven't broken it yet, please don't break it. But if you have broken it, don't give up either. Don't give up either. Which leads to our fourth principle. Trust makes simple. Distrust makes complicated. I was making fun of myself because I didn't realize when I wrote that's like caveman speak. Trust makes simple. Distrust makes complicated. It's just because it fits on the screen nicer if I put it this way. But you probably know this, right? Trust makes relationships smoother, right? Communication is clear. Intentions are assumed to be good. When you have high trust, you assume good intentions behind things. Interactions just seem to flow. You can take somebody's word just at face value, just what they say. Yeah, that's what they mean. Agreements can be made with a handshake. Promises can be relied upon. Teamwork is just more seamless. Trust makes things simple. Jesus said in Matthew 5:37, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Say what you mean. Mean what you say. If you don't have that in your life, can you imagine being in a relationship with somebody who they just said whatever they meant and then whatever they meant they said? There's a level of truth and candor that would be amazing to have in a relationship. You never want to lie, right? So that's the truth part. But then candor is telling more and more of the truth. High trust, high candor, be awesome to have that. And even if you don't have many of those in your life, you can imagine what that would be like. And then the reverse is true. The reverse is true, that distrust makes everything complicated, right? When trust is low or absent, you have to have excessive explanations and long conversations about very simple things. You ever been there? All of a sudden now we're having 3-hour conversations about something that should have took 2 seconds, but it's because trust isn't there. There's constant second guessing, wondering, worrying. I don't wish that on anyone. Tons of energy spent verifying facts. You ever done that? I feel like a stinking lawyer, like looking through evidence all the time. It's exhausting. It strains relationships. If you would come up to me and say, my relationship is just complicated. If you say that to me, for me that immediately tells me there's something going on with trust in the relationship, some kind of trust things going on there. Because trust makes it simple. It's the lack of trust that makes things complicated, and all of a sudden now you're doing a ton of work to get very little progress. It's kind of like if you're into hiking, there's a big difference between hiking at low altitude and hiking at high altitude, right? If you're down in the valley and you're walking through a field, you're just walking, you're just doing the thing. It's not that big of a deal. But if you get up to altitude where the oxygen's a little thinner, every step costs more, right? All of a sudden you have to think a whole lot more about what you're doing and plan out where you're going a little bit more, because at low oxygen, It's a little scarier. Every step costs you a little bit more. And that's what low trust will do to you. So again, just continuing to press on how valuable trust is to a relationship. One last principle here, and well, before we jump back into the story, one more. This one's especially important if you struggle to trust, if you live over here. And I get this. So in my life, I've kind of seen both sides of the coin. I have a wife who's awesome. We've been married almost 21 years, and we've never had a reason to doubt each other at all. It's been a beautiful, high trust. Everything's so much smoother. Not saying my marriage is easy, but it's easier than it would be if we didn't have trust. We have 4 kids. I don't trust all them, but I trust her. It's us versus them a lot of times, and it's good. We have a unified front, and I love that. I enjoy a high trust relationship there. But I have had, a couple of years ago, I had a streak of people who, like when they got close to me, they hurt me. And this happens, if you know anything about ministry, this happens. But man, it was like people who had gotten to the point where they were like, this sounds so third grade, but like my best friends, to the point that I was like, I'm not going to have a best friend anymore. Like I was like that kind of like an elementary school kid, like you're never being my best friend again, ever. We're not playing at recess anymore. I'm not doing that. But like if you've ever had trust broken, what happens is you almost kind of shut down a little bit. And I had a season where I definitely pushed it. My wife was in and everybody else was out. And I closed the door because it hurt too much. And it seemed like I got to the point where I felt like I am terrible at picking friends. What is going on here? I just keep getting burned over and over and over again. So I understand both sides. But this one for you, if you've been burned, if you're like me, was in some spots where you kind of pushed out and put the walls up, this one's important. So here's the principle. A little trust must be given in order for more to be earned. A little trust must be given in order for more to be earned. And I know you're like, wait a minute, you're talking about building trust and you have to earn it. This is to begin a relationship, or this is to begin the restoration of a relationship. That first bit of trust is given. You give it. And the reason is kind of the economy of trust. It just doesn't work if you don't give some. If you have 0, you can't earn more. It's kind of like an investment. If you have $0 invested, it doesn't matter how much the stock grows, you still have $0, right? If you have 0 Bitcoin, it doesn't matter to you if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, right? It's never going to do it. But if it wouldn't matter to you at all. But if you have $1, it can grow, right? And that's the idea. When you're starting off a relationship, you have to give them that first little bit. When you're trying to restore a relationship, you have to give them that first little bit. And then you watch. And you have to see what they do with it. Are they going to be trustworthy? And then it can grow, and it can grow, and it can grow. And if you give them a little bit and they break it again, you give them a little bit and they break it again, that's a different conversation. But the first little bit is given. And here's what makes that hard. That's scary, man, because you don't want to get hurt again. It's kind of like taking your armor off after a battle. You know that if you take your armor off around somebody, they could stab you. You're afraid to give that first little bit of trust because you know that then they could hurt you. And you're like, I already got stabbed right there. They're going to stick the knife back in the same spot and twist. Like, I don't want that. And I get it. I get it. But trust, it's kind of the thing that enables relationships, right? Like, if you say, I'm not going to trust anybody ever again, you just said in another way, I'm going to live my life oxygen-free. I'm not doing oxygen anymore. I'm out. And I just want to say, if you do that, you're depriving yourself of any depth of relationship in your life at all. You're not going to add anymore. You're just going to be at arm's length from everybody. So it's risky to trust. It's also risky not to. C.S. Lewis says it this way. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. If you want to have relationships in your life, there is an element of this where it's going to be risky. You're going to be vulnerable. The moment you trust the person could hurt you, the moment you trust they could stab you, and I know that's scary, but the alternative is you shut it down and you don't have loving relationships in your life. You have no oxygen and you keep everyone far away. So I guess you got to pick. And there might be a season where you're like, I can't do it right now. I'm still bleeding from the last one. I need to not. And that's fair, but I would just encourage you, don't make that decision as like a permanent one in your life. Say, hey, this is a season, I'm gonna heal up, and then we're gonna dive back in and take the risk of trusting again. But man, don't decide to end it. You cannot live your life like that. It's not how God created you to live. All right. Let's jump back into the story. We can learn some things here from Joshua, both good and bad. So he made a treaty with people that he shouldn't have. He trusted too much too early. He gets hurt, other people get hurt. Here's the first thing we can learn from this story. And you probably noticed it right away when we read it. The first thing you can learn from this story, kind of in the negative sense, is you need to include God in the trust building process. Include God in the trust building process. Joshua's big mistake here is he didn't include God in the decision making process. He didn't consult God, which is crazy, by the way. If you're reading the story, it's so consistent. God moved, God moved, God moved. God split the Jordan River, took down Jericho's walls, helped them with Ai, and then they get to this point, and Joshua, you could tell, he was like, this is weird. I don't know if I trust these people. All right, let's do it. And he signs, and he doesn't go to God. He doesn't include God. And that's very unwise when you're taking a leap of trusting someone. So you, in your life, when you're about to make a decision to like increase the depth of your trust with another person, you need to seek God. You need to ask him. Include him in the process. Lean into him. Now, here's the thing. Joshua had a slight advantage, right? And pastors don't usually talk about this, but like very clearly in the story, God is like speaking to Joshua, right? He gets like a booming voice from heaven, like, do this with Jericho. I'm going to move in this way. And we don't have that, right? You can't pray to God about a relationship and have God go, don't date him. Like that would be, he's going to cheat on you. Look at the way he wears this hat. Don't date him. Like that would be awesome. But you don't have that. You don't have that. But just because God isn't going to boom from heaven doesn't mean you shouldn't include him. Ask him for wisdom. Ask him for discernment. Ask him to do something in your spirit, to show you. And here's another way God can speak. Sometimes God's voice isn't a booming voice from heaven. Sometimes it's a good friend that you do trust, who maybe has a slightly different angle on things, and they can be like, oh, he's going to cheat on you. Look at the way he wears his hat. Like she can see it even though you can't see it. So sometimes it's allowing good godly wisdom into your life, and it's other people that God speaks through. But include God in that trust building process. Joshua didn't. He got burned. So the Gibeonites lied, like planned out elaborate ruse to trick Joshua into making this deal. Imagine this scenario. Imagine you're Joshua, like in your tent. You just made the deal. You've got a million other things you're worried about. Somebody comes barging into the tent and is like, we followed them. They don't live very far from here, dude. You blew it. They live like just down the road. They lied. How many of you have had that feeling before? The moment where trust gets broke. The disillusion. Like the fog clears and you're like, oh, that gotta be one of the worst feelings in the world when you realize you've been lied to, when you realize somebody's been playing you. So we had to have a little bit of that. Now, for the stuff that we've dealt with, we have a little depth of relationship that it hurts us worse because this is, I just met them. But my reaction, I wouldn't have been hurt. I'd have been mad. And I would have been tempted to be like, where is the paper? Like, give me this agreement? What agreement are you talking about? I don't know what agreement you're talking about. I would have been like, let's go get them. Get your swords, boys. We're doing this thing. Like, I would have been done. I would have been furious. I imagine you would have been tempted to do the same thing, but look at what they do instead. Verse 19. But the leaders replied. since we have sworn an oath in the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel, we cannot touch them. This is what we must do. We must let them live, for divine anger would come upon us if we broke our oath. Let them live. I like how they say it like twice, because it's like we got to convince ourselves this is the thing. We're not going to break the agreement. So here's the second to last principle. Don't let people breaking your trust cause you to lose your integrity. Don't let people breaking your trust cause you to lose your integrity. I would have wanted to. In this instance, I would have been like, we can fix this thing. We can fix this thing. What Gibby nights? What are you talking about? They don't exist anymore. Like, I would have been so tempted. So tempted. And I think when you get hurt like this, when you get stabbed in the back, it is so easy to want to like throw the rules out the window. When you get stabbed in the back, you want to pull the knife out and stab them in the front, right? And you can justify it 100 ways in your head. But I heard a pastor say once that a sinful response to sin is still sin. That you reacting to someone else hurting you is still wrong. God has called you to be a certain person. God has called you to do certain things. Just because someone hurts you does not mean throw all that out. I get to do whatever I want here. Rules are gone. No. Joshua could have stooped to their level. He could have said, you broke my trust, I'm breaking yours. But he didn't. And there's something to that. There's something to holding on to your integrity in the face of people wronging you. God didn't want, you could have argued yourself into whatever you wanted probably, but God didn't want him to add to the first mistake a second one. First mistake was trusting. Shouldn't have done that. Don't make another one by going at them, by trying to return fire when they hurt you. And maybe I can tap into your stubbornness. Think of it this way. They already lied to you. They already hurt you. You're already bleeding. Don't let the fact that they hurt you cause you to now live beneath the person that God's called you to be. Don't let them hurt you and corrupt you. Give them the first one, but don't give them the second one. You're not going to get me to act in a way that God doesn't want me to act. No, you can't have that. I'm bleeding, here's your knife back. No, I'm not doing that. Don't give them the satisfaction. Because again, remember, Christian, if you're a Christian, we're called to be different, right? Jesus said if someone slaps you on one cheek, you're supposed to turn the other. That's radical. That's radical. Jesus said, if someone asks you for your coat, give them your shirt too. Jesus said, don't repay evil with evil, but overcome evil by doing good. This is different. This is one of the things that makes us different. We're supposed to respond differently when somebody hurts us, specifically when someone breaks our trust. When someone curses you, you bless them. When someone wrongs you, you forgive them. When someone hates you, you love them. This is the stuff that Jesus encouraged us to. This is his life. And I know if you're hurting, it's so tempting. It's so tempting to fire back. It's so tempting to fight back. And there's even a part of it, I've had so many of these conversations where like you got wronged, you got your trust broken, and like I have to talk the person out of trying to even the scales of justice themselves. Well, I was wronged and I want to make it right. Now there's another word for that. That's called revenge. We don't call it that though. In the moment we call it, no, this is unjust and I'm going to make it just. And I have a high sense of justice. So I'm like with you. I'm like, where are we going to fight this person? I get it. But God talks about this specifically, and this is what you can release a little bit in your own life. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Give that to him. Let him worry about the scales of justice, because he'll do it. He'll do it. Don't enjoy it too much. He will be the one who rights things. He rights the wrongs. You can't. It'll corrupt you. It'll mess you up. Leave it to him. Don't let people breaking your trust cause you to lose your integrity. All right, last thing, and this is the most important. This is the thing that Joshua did right. Don't let people breaking your trust cause you to distrust God. And this one's so hard. And I was trying to figure out, like, why is this so common that when somebody has trust broken in their life that they end up not trusting God. And I don't know for sure. I have this theory that you have like a trust center in in your soul somewhere. And when somebody damages that and hits it and sparks are flying everywhere in your trust center, that it's like logic would say, don't trust that person anymore. But what you end up doing is when somebody really hurts your trust is you go, I don't trust anybody, right? Instead of saying you don't trust the person, it's you just want to kind of push away from everybody. And it's not just horizontally. You have all these horizontal relationships. You tend to also shut down your vertical one as well. Like, I don't trust you, I don't trust anybody, and God, I'm struggling with trusting you right now. And again, I get it if that's the way it works. It's just something to trust in general in your life. When it gets damaged, you have a hard time trusting anyone, including God. But man, can we make an exception? Can we tell ourselves repeatedly, God is not people, people are not God. These are not the same thing. That a person hurt you, God didn't. That a person broke your trust, God didn't. And try to separate these things out. And I get it. Maybe you need to have a conversation with God about that. Maybe you're mad at him. It's church, we're not supposed to admit that stuff. Maybe you want to go, hey God, could have used a heads up for that. Would have been nice if you would have told me that this was coming. Because you could have, because you knew, even though I didn't. Maybe you need to have a conversation with God about that. Maybe you need to go for a long walk out somewhere. It's cold right now, nobody's outside. Go yell at God somewhere. Go have a real deep prayer session with God. But I hope it ends in you trust him. It was a horrible situation, but he is a good God. It hurt really bad, but he loves you deeply. Joshua got this right. Joshua didn't push away from God. Would have been super tempting to. Messed up. God could have gave me a heads up. But instead, as we saw last week in the next battle, Joshua leans more into God in the season that directly followed his trust being broken instead of pulling away. And God did miracles in that. So man, I can't encourage you enough. Lean into God. Lean into him when your trust gets broken. It's the time you need him the most. It's the time you need him the most. When you are bleeding from the back, you need God the most. You can trust him. Even if it doesn't seem like it, you can trust him. He bats 1,000. No human in your life does. So, trust is the oxygen of human relationships. You got to give it its proper place. You can't shut it down and you can't give it away too. You need to follow Jesus in this. Deciding how much time I have to tell a whole entire thing or not. I'm going to do it. There's this other story in the Bible about a guy named Joseph, and he has his trust burned, completely burned. His brothers throw him in a pit, almost kill him, don't kill him, sell him to slavery. Like the worst kind of, the people who should be closest to you, who should love you the most, betrayed him the worst, broke his trust completely. And I bet he struggled with that for years, for decades. He struggled with the fact that his brothers broke his trust. But sparing the whole story, which is like the giant second half of the book of Genesis, they get to the end and his brothers now stand before him and he's in charge of like half the known world and the power dynamics have completely flipped and his brothers are terrified that he's gonna try to right the scales of justice himself. Joseph says this very profound thing. He says, what you meant for evil all those years ago, God meant for good. Now it took me, 5 decades to see it, because back then it was the worst thing that ever happened to me and I was bleeding and in a place where I never wanted to trust another person again. But now that I have some distance, I see that God used it. That because God is good, even though you guys aren't, God is good. And I want to encourage you that you need, sometimes in order to see that God is good in a situation, you're going to need some distance, but don't push away from him. Trust him through the mess and you'll get to a place where you'll look back and you go, okay, so that person wasn't good, but God is. And he used it and he's done some miracles in that stuff and you will see God is faithful if you give him the time to prove it. Trust him in the meantime. Trust him in the meantime. All right, today we're taking communion. So if you have a little cup, with the juice and the cracker in it. If you don't have it, raise your hand if you want to participate. By the way, you don't have to. If you're maybe newer here or maybe you're not a follower of Jesus yet, you do not have to take communion right now. This is not one of those weird religious things. We're going to force you to do that. But if that's something you want to participate in, this is the time. So here's what communion is. It's one of the things that we do as Christians as a physical representation of like a deep spiritual truth. The night Jesus was betrayed and arrested, he took bread and broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And then he took a cup of wine and he said, "Hey, this is my blood, which is spilled for you." And he used these things as physical representations of what he was going to do for us. So we're supposed to do this in remembrance of him. We take this little cracker and this little sip of juice to remind ourselves of what Jesus has done for us. So if you're a Christian, this is a time where you need to reconnect with God here right now. And here's how we're going to do it. The worship team is going to play a song, and I just want you to have a moment with God. Maybe it's been a minute since you've had a moment with God. And this is the purpose of this, is remembering what Jesus has done for you. Remembering that he died for you, remembering that he didn't stay dead, that he conquered sin, Satan, death, and demons. And then that power now resides in you, Christian. And you reflect on how much he's forgiven you, what he's done for you, how much you didn't deserve it. And let that sink in here again. Let this moment be important. And then when you're ready, you can take it on your own. Take the cracker, take the juice as the song's being played. Pray with me. Lord, we thank you that you are trustworthy. I pray for the person in this room who's been burned recently. They're still bleeding right now from a breach of trust in their life. Pray that you would be close. Pray that you would heal and love. Help them feel your presence, Lord. I pray that everybody in here would run to you in those painful moments, not away from you. That we wouldn't do that thing where we think, oh, I can't trust anyone, including God. Lord, I pray that we would banish that. We would run to you. We would know that you're good. We would know that you love. Lord, I pray for the person sitting in this room who maybe hasn't even decided to start a relationship with you yet, Lord, that there would be a conversation had today with you. Pray that today is the day where they ask your forgiveness and start a relationship. Give them your life. Pray that they would just lay it down today, Lord, the same way you laid your life down for them. Pray for this church, Lord, that this would be a church where trust could grow, be a depth to it. That we would mean what we say and say what we mean, and that things would be simple because of that and honoring to you. In Jesus' name I pray.